Good evening. The slow march to eco-communism begins. Britain must cut its meat and dairy consumption by half to meet the latest net zero targets, according to the government climate change watchdog, the CCC, who are behaving more like the CCP. The plan to cut our meat consumption by 50% is now sitting on the desk of Ed Miliband, whose zeal for net zero will see us bet the house and our energy supply on flaky renewables. The chairman of this dystopian climate change committee has said that persuading British consumers to change their diets would play a key role in achieving these cuts in emissions. Well, there's your red flag already. The government persuading people to do things has dark echoes of the pandemic, when our faces were covered by those, in my view, scientifically worthless masks. At the time, the government persuaded us to stay home and save lives, even though non-lockdown countries had similar, if not better, outcomes. And whilst the vaccine may have helped the vulnerable, to this day, given that it didn't stop transmission or infection, no one has explained to me why we jabbed the entire healthy population, including children. So forgive me if I'm a little sceptical about being persuaded to do things by government bodies. Once bitten, twice shy and all that. And there is a problem. Just as with COVID, these unprecedented measures, which, mark my words, begin as a suggestion and end as an instruction, just don't make any sense. Why are we giving up a ribeye steak, fish fingers and a glass of milk to reduce our already minuscule 1% of global emissions, whilst China, Brazil, the USA and India burn fossil fuels for fun? China are not doing net zero, so why are we? Another question that you won't get a straight answer to from these eco-ideologues, who would happily see us living in caves and munching on crushed beetles. Have you noticed, as with lockdowns, masking and vaccines, once again we have government measures courtesy of the expert class, who in my view got it completely wrong during COVID, that the consequence is less freedom, less choice and being less healthy. It's blindingly obvious that we are omnivores and that meat, fish and dairy are an important part of our diets. Now, I've got vegans who watch and listen to the show and they love the vegan way of life. But going plant-based makes it far more difficult to get the protein the body needs, and in many cases, doctors recommend that you should supplement with vitamins and minerals just to make up the shortfall, which doesn't sound very healthy to me. Plus, a move to plant-based will see the hideous spectre of monocrop agriculture. How that's good for the environment is anyone's guess, with wheat, soy, rice and other crops sprayed with litres of chemical fertilisers and pesticides, which is in stark contrast to dairy farming, in which the cows eat the grass, then poo on it, which nourishes the soil, and they wee on it, which waters it. This report also ignores the extraordinary value of meat as a foodstuff and material. You get about 1,000 burgers from one good-sized cow. The bones are crushed up for use as a natural soil fertiliser. The blood and any other unwanted connective tissue is used in dog food, cat food and other processed meat. And we even use the skin as leather for our shoes, handbags and the lovely sofa or armchair that you're hopefully sat in tonight watching this show. If we come off meat and go plant-based, it will be a gold rush for the food industry, who will be serving up hideous soya burgers, fake meat sausages and vegan bacon, the first two ingredients of which are water and vegetable oil. Yum. These processed meats will see public health worsen because they're not natural or healthy, and the environmental case doesn't even stack up either, because it will see a further reliance on factory-made pre-packaged food shipped to us via millions of road and air miles. Make it make sense. What about the rather distressing report that suggests children raised on a vegan diet were on average 3 centimetres shorter than those who eat meat? The bones of vegan children were also smaller and less strong, putting them at risk of fractures or osteoporosis in later life. All of this, according to University College London's Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health. Yikes. We've been eating meat for millennia, And if we pursue this plant-based experiment, I predict that the next generation will be sicker, fatter, more tired, and frankly, malnourished. Most vegans don't get past 3 months before they give up. There are multiple reports of irregular periods, loss of muscle mass, fatigue, and even depression from this highly restrictive diet. So in my view, those seeking to enforce a vegan diet are silly sausages. I've got beef with them, and frankly, they can burger off. Making everyone go plant-based is utter bollocks. OK, folks, your reaction, gbnews.com/your say. But first, tonight's top pundits. Titan of entertainment journalism, Nina Mishkov, former executive editor of the News of the World, Neil Wallace, and the fearless political journalist and broadcaster, Fleur Elizabeth. Great to see all three of you. Let me start with you, Neil. Your reaction to this suggestion from government boffins that we should cut our meat consumption by half to save the planet.
Well, you've stolen my line, of course. They can burger off, because...
That would have been a headline if you were still at the News of the World, wouldn't it?
Well, if News of the World still existed. But,
More's the pity. That was red meat, wasn't it, the News of the World?
It certainly was.
Red top, red meat.
But you know what? All of this is the classic example of virtue signalling. Because, in fact, the vegan debate has already been and gone. The vegan drive to increase their market share...
Hold fire, because all of this is gold, and we need to turn your microphone on, because I think it's accidentally switched it off. No one is going to get censored on my watch, so let's reconnect Neil Wallace to his actual microphone. But Nina, let's get your views on this. There is a link, isn't there, between farming and emissions and therefore climate change?
Yes, I mean, the problem with cattle is the fact that, they fart, basically, and the emissions cause...
As do journalists, by the way. Look
exactly.
at Neil. Why do you think his microphone went off?
Hot air abounds. Hot air abounds on this sofa.
Touché.
24 hours a day. So that is basically one of the problems with the whole thing. But they're not saying cut meat out altogether. They're saying cut it by 50%. And we know, if we think even of our dear departed Michael Mosley, that red meat, a constant diet of red meat, is not good for you. The number of people who die from heart attacks and strokes because of people contributing to their ill health by eating far too much meat, processed meat which is filled with nitrates, things like bacon, you know, absolutely, if you eat them every day, they shorten your life. It's been proven. So nobody's saying go out and eat grass or, you know, go out and just eat vegetables. But, you know, the basic diet, and we have no idea of cuisine in this country and no idea of nutrition, because otherwise our hospitals wouldn't be full the way they are, and we wouldn't be, you know, obesity wouldn't be costing us billions of pounds a year. We need to have a sensible balanced diet. I've hardly touched red meat for decades. And, you know, I don't feel I'm going to fall down in a dead heat because of it. OK, Neil, we've got you hooked up now. I mean, many people think, by the way, that the risk to health of red meat is a complete myth and that saturated fat has been wrongly demonised. And, in fact, it's things like seed oils and processed food which is making us ill. Processed food is dreadful. Indeed, and perhaps sugar. But anyway, what was your original point?
My main point was this. This is a classic piece of virtue signalling. They've got a new government in. They're trying to stake their place on the land. The whole vegan debate went because people weren't interested. They did try it, and they realised there was no taste in it, and if it doesn't work, they're not going to eat it. But there is a much, much bigger, more important thing in this. The emissions that come out of the UK are minuscule in terms of the rest of the world. You touched on China there. Right, I went across on train China early this year. You go on a train across industrialised China, you see every half hour you'll see another power plant belching fumes out, coal-fired, yeah. All cold. And
they're building new ones every week.
Hang on. Wind farms.
Well, yeah, they might be building wind farms, but they're not shutting down the these coal-powered fire stations. And then you come to the... Hang on a sec.
Should they shut them down? Should they shut them down?
Well, they're not going to,
No,
Nina. No, but
they're not going to because they're not doing net zero.
It's just virtue signalling.
Do you think they should shut them down?
It's just virtue signalling.
No.
They're not going to do it.
No, never mind what they do to other... Do you think they should shut them down?
This is like Just Stop Oil, standing in the middle of the road saying, no one can come, no one can move past.
I'm just asking.
People can die.
Are you evading the question? Should China shut down those coal-fired power stations?
I come from a world that is realistic. They're not going to do it. Now, in a perfect world, of course, we would start from a different place.
Well,
I think we
Neil,
wouldn't start here.
Neil Scott, I think Neil would say, yes, they should, but they won't. Therefore, why should we?
But the point is that for cows, for instance,
we want to be a world,
the whole
we're a world
issue
about
about the number of cows in this country are minuscule. Go to India. Have you ever been to India?
Well,
if you go to India, there's more cows in India than there are people. So the truth of the matter is we have a minuscule problem that purely politically is being exploited by this government.
America had more livestock 200 years ago than it has now, and the settlers pretty much did a cull of 45 million bison, and so they actually have less livestock than they did 2 centuries ago. Fleur, are you happy to give up meat to save the planet?
No, I'm not. And this is just another ban from the government. It's smoking, it's drinking, it's sugar.
Gambling.
And not only I don't know how on earth they would enforce cutting it by 50%, because I did a few months work in a supermarket, and the amount of meat left that was just getting chucked away was crazy. So clearly people aren't even buying the stock that's already there. So are they going to cut how much is sold in supermarkets? I think people would still eat the same amount. But it's taking away people's enjoyment. Nothing beats a steak, I'm sorry. But also, health.
Fleur, does this have echoes of the pandemic? Because in many ways, I was radicalised by the pandemic because so many of these measures were forced upon us. We stayed home to save the NHS. We borrowed £500 billion, paid people who are healthy, weren't going to die from COVID, to stay at home.
We didn't know that at the time.
Well, I think we did, because I think it was very, very clear early in the pandemic that this was a nasty virus, but non-fatal to most. So I just think there are worrying echoes here of COVID measures, and I think you're going to replace...
quite a lot of people.
It's just my view.
It could have been double that.
Look, too many people died from COVID, but look at the reaction. It's destroyed the country. And I would argue that if you compare countries that locked down and those that didn't, there's no difference.
It's pretty much Sweden. Pretty much Sweden. That was
lowest excess deaths in Europe since 2020.
But the point being...
Why aren't there more dead Swedish people?
Sweden had other factors going for them. They are a far healthier society.
All right. Well, then why did Sweden do better than Norway or Finland?
They are far healthier.
Comparable country.
They are. But also, they are far more obedient. They did it. They locked themselves down.
They were given the choice.
They were given the choice.
If only we were.
But would we have obeyed it?
OK, well, listen, I take your point, but so, Fleur, do you think, the sort of government authoritarianism, this overreach, my suggestion in the big opinion, we saw it during COVID, what begins as an idea or a recommendation becomes an instruction, and I think that's going to happen with net zero. What do you think?
Yeah, well, lockdown made me so strong, so passionate about freedom, which I didn't care as much about before, because you don't want the government dictating how you live your life. I went to the woke University of Bristol, and I lived in catered accommodation in the first year, and they would have meat-free days every week. And sure, sometimes I might choose not to have meat for whatever reason. Maybe if I was a climate activist, that could be the reason. But I don't want it enforced on me. We should have the choice. We should be able to choose how we live our lives and what's best for our health and what we enjoy.
But nobody's
Nobody's banning it, but I think that will happen. I think, Nina, it's the direction of travel, because we saw it during COVID. The authoritarian state will rear its ugly head.
That was a very extreme...
Because it was an emergency. And there will be another emergency in 5 years' time.
Well, there's a climate emergency.
Okay, but there's an emergency in the NHS. There's an emergency in the NHS, and we need to be healthier as a nation, and we need to be healthier.
And on that we can agree. Very briefly, a couple of seconds, Neil.
The problem is that what you're seeing with the COVID inquiry is big figures who were sat in there saying, you must do this, you must do this, that are now saying, actually, it was based on poor science. It didn't really work. I tend to agree with Nina about some of the...
That's why we put you together, you know.
Yeah. There's been too negative a slant taken on COVID and how we reacted. Okay. But there is no doubt that it became tremendously authoritarian, and that it's been proved, and they have admitted at the COVID inquiry, they got it wrong.
Well, indeed.